Hello, everybody. I'm gonna give a minute or two to let everyone get online. I'm seeing lots of people join us. Welcome. So to respect Peter's time, and we're going to want to hear everything that he has to say, I'm going to start now. And I just want to say good morning to everyone. I'm Karen Giberson. For those who I haven't met yet, I am the president and the CEO of the Accessories Council. And we welcome you to our webinar on tariffs. As we continue to navigate this rapidly evolving business landscape, the role of traditional associations and trade associations has never been more vital. At the Accessories Council, we're deeply committed to supporting our industry, championing brands, businesses of all sizes, and creating meaningful connections. We provide resources, education, and opportunities to help you grow. We're there for you when times are good, and we're there for you when times are challenging. When you participate in events like this and others and support the council, join the council, advertise in our magazine, you allow us to offer opportunities like this. So I encourage you to stay in touch. If you're not already a member, reach out. I'll stay on after Peter goes if you have any questions for me. And you can also check us out at accessoriescouncil.org. There's a lot more information there. I welcome Peter Klestadt, who's been an amazing friend and longtime partner of the Accessories Council, to speak with us today. He is a partner at, let me get this right, Grunfeld, Desiderio, Lebowitz, Silverman, and Klestadt. And he has generously volunteered his time this morning to share his expertise and hopefully answer some of your questions. Now, if you have questions, I'm going to encourage you to put them into the chat. If you know me, you can also text them to me. I'm going to aggregate all of the questions after Peter's presentation and try to answer as many that you may have individually. We'll also have Peter's information if you want to reach out to him directly. And the other thing is, I know we have some members of the press who are with us today. Welcome. If you would like to quote anything, we just would ask that you would send it our way first so Peter can approve it, or we can approve it before you use any of the quotes. Peter brings over 40 years of experience as one of the most respected voices in the world of customs and trade law. It's a very niche area, and we got to know Peter during the first time the tariffs happened, as handbags were one of the early fashion categories that were involved. So we became friendly and used his services at that time. And I know he helped navigate the complicated system at that point with many of our members. So Peter, I welcome you this morning and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to present to you all. Can't say meet you all. As Karen said, my law firm, we specialize exclusively in customs and trade. So this is our bailiwick, and we'll do our best to inform everybody as to the recent current events. What I have done is I have a little PowerPoint. It's a high-level PowerPoint, don't worry. Hopefully I am sharing now. Karen, am I sharing?
You are sharing and have just opened the chat.
Just trying to stay fully. Okay, great. Okay, so happy Liberation Day, everybody. So as everyone knows by now, on April 2nd, President Trump announced new reciprocal tariffs, and they function as follows. Effective April 5th, which is tomorrow. Yeah. They are imposing an additional 10% tariff on all countries, all products, all countries, with a few exceptions, but the exceptions don't really impact this group for the most part. We'll get to them in a moment. Then effective April 9th, those rates are being increased to country-specific rates on about 60 different countries, which are termed bad actors, if you will. So, for example, China will rise to 34%, and the EU will get 20%, and there's a whole schedule in Annex 1 of the executive order, country by country, which ones are getting impacted. So the way the tariffs will work is they'll be in addition to all other tariffs, like the 301 tariff that Karen referred to on China. So, for example, and so if you have an article of jewelry that's normally subject to a 5.5% rate, back in 2019 or so, during the first Trump administration, he imposed an additional 7.5%. Based on a 301 action. That was on list 4A. For handbags, it was an additional 25%. Then last month, he imposed an additional 20% relating to the issue of fentanyl, basically punishing China not doing enough to prevent the fentanyl trade that is alleged to emanate from China and find its way into the United States. So he imposed 20%, and now, effective April 9th, there will be an additional 34%. So as you can see, it all adds up to 67%. There's a little asterisk there. The reason being that the way we interpret the executive order, it's not written that clearly. We interpret the April 5th 10% to be adjusted upwards on April 9th to 34%. There are some people that read it differently, and they think the April 5th 10% will stack on top of 34%. I don't think that's the case, but it's subject to CBP verification, and we are waiting for, right as of today, as of this moment, Customs has not issued any FAQs. So we're waiting for some clarification on certain issues, and I'll try and note them as we go. So, but I'm pretty sure that this is the correct interpretation. There is a limited exception, and it's for goods on the water before April 5th will be exempt from that 10% that I just referred to. And similarly, on the water in transit to the United States before April 9th will be exempt from the country-specific rate. So, for example, 34% for China, 20% for the EU. Another asterisk, well, should be an asterisk, but a note. The executive order refers to on a vessel as the final mode of transport to the United States. We don't know whether that was meant to cover all modes of transport or was intended to only cover ocean shipments. So again, it's something else that needs to be clarified. And even if it is on a vessel coming to the United States, if the vessel goes to Vancouver and then it gets railed or trucked down to the United States, the vessel is not the final mode of transport, so it may not qualify. So there are little nits like that that still need to be sorted out and clarified. But you know, the basic premise is that there is an in-transit exemption that one can try to claim. Another part of the executive order was that he eliminated the de minimis exception for products from China. As many of you, I'm sure, know, there has been a de minimis exception for goods, single package shipments of $800 or less. It has been a boon to the e-commerce industry, and those would come in duty-free. That's no longer allowed for Chinese origin goods effective May 2nd. There'll be a separate procedure applicable to postal goods. We don't have to get into that here. The executive order also states that it is essentially, it's the intention of the government to eliminate de minimis on all goods once systems are put in place to handle the increased volume of shipments. Now, he had said that with respect to Chinese goods back in March, when he did the fentanyl executive order. So he's kind of repeated that more broadly for all de minimis goods, regardless of the country of origin. So I would say de minimis is on life support. What it'll turn into, I don't know, whether they'll be lowering the threshold or eliminating the procedure entirely. We just don't know at this point. There is an Annex 2 to the executive order with a long list of tariff numbers that are exempted from these reciprocal tariffs. Examples are copper, wood products, pharmaceuticals, auto, aluminum and steel products, which are subject to a previous, what's called the Section 32, 25% tariff. The only reason those are accepted is because they're subject to different types of actions, either pending or previously taken. So it's not that, copper and wood or get a free ride, or pharmaceuticals even. It's that something else is coming for them. So that's what I would tell everybody. I looked at the list. There was one category of products that may or may not be of interest to this group, and that would be printed materials and books. So that might be something that is of interest to somebody in this vast audience. The reciprocal tariffs do not directly impact Mexico and Canada. As you will recall, back in March or earlier February, he imposed a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada. He then retracted that to say, well, if it's a USMCA, formerly NAFTA, qualifying goods, it would be exempt from that additional 25%. He has maintained that treatment through past April 2nd. So if you're manufacturing in Mexico or Canada and you qualify and claim USMCA treatment, you're exempt from additional tariffs. If you do not qualify and it's still a product of Mexico or Canada, then it'll be subject to a 25% tariff. That's how that will work. Okay, so now the fun stuff. What can we do about it? Mitigation strategies. So obviously companies need to be as nimble as possible in this environment. I don't know that there's any antidote to make this all go away, but we can talk about some areas, most of which are classic customs planning strategies, but they still can be effective. So the first one is customs valuation. Customs duties are generally charged based on the price paid by the importer to the foreign seller. It's called transaction value. And there are different ways to restructure those transactions to lower the dutiable cost. Doesn't change the price you pay to the vendor necessarily, but it does change the cost basis upon which the duty is assessed. So, for example, there's one called first sale, which contemplates if there's a back-to-back sale that bring the goods to the United States, you're allowed to take the earlier sale action for purposes of customs value. So, for example, if you place an order with a trading company who acts as a middleman, who in turn subcontracts the production to a factory, there's a factory sale to the middleman and then a middleman sale to you, the importer. You're entitled to declare the factory sale price, the first sale price, if it meets certain requirements. So, that is a structure that very often already exists in the background that people haven't necessarily taken advantage of. So it's worth exploring whether you can get back to that an earlier sale if it exists. There are other strategies such as what I sometimes refer to as unbundling. So for example, you buy a product, and within the purchase price of that product, there are arguably non-dutiable overheads that the seller is incurring. Example, quality control, logistics costs, things of that nature, which if restructured and separated into a separate service company, could be rendered non-dutiable. There are things people have to do, but that's a planning strategy which can be explored for importers. And a lot of these strategies, once they're put in place, they continue, and you get the benefit, in years to come, regardless of where the tariff rates settle. Another area that's definitely worth exploring is country of origin. If you look at the schedule of reciprocal tariffs, the rates range dramatically. So if you have the ability to perform multi-country processing, you may have the ability to shift country of origin from one country to another. For example, jewelry, let's say a diamond ring, an engagement ring, very easy. If you cast in one country and then get to China, for example, where you set it with $1 million diamond, polish it, rhodium, etc., it's the country of casting that determines the country of origin of the finished ring. Doesn't matter that the diamond cost $1 million to put in. So the duty would be assessed based on the country of the casting. In fact, if you cast it in the United States and exported the casting under the same scenario, your finished ring would be a product of the United States and would be exempt from all reciprocal tariffs. So, I mean, there are different strategies like that. You can't market made in the USA. There are different rules for that. But, that's something one could do. Another example is sunglasses. If the frames are made in one country and sent to a second country where the lenses are manufactured and placed into the sunglass frames, customs considers the country where the lenses were manufactured and inserted to be the country of origin. So again, one can look at diversifying your supply chain a bit and seeing whether you can move key operations from one country to another to gain a better tariff rate advantage. Bonded warehouses are still a viable option. A bonded warehouse is one where you can bring goods into a bonded warehouse, hold them there without the payment of duty, and not pay duty until you withdraw them for consumption, a normal entry, or if you end up exporting from the bonded warehouse, then you never have to pay the duty. Some people are considering using bonded warehouses because they're betting that these tariff rates will, and I think that's a fair bet, that one can anticipate that most foreign governments have lined up outside the Oval Office and are trying to negotiate their way out of this situation, or at least mitigate it. So it may be that deferral is not a bad play if your business allows for that type of a deferral. Foreign trade zones act as similar to bonded warehouses, but they are specifically prohibited from use to avoid these duties in the executive order. So foreign trade zones will not help you avoid these duties, even if the rates go down after you've placed it in a foreign trade zone. You're going to be stuck with the rate that was applicable when it went into the zone. And finally, there's a question as to whether drawback is a viable option here. When drawback is a refund of 99% of duties originally paid upon export of goods in unused condition. There is a type of drawback called substitution drawback, which says that if you import one item at a high duty rate and export a commercially interchangeable item that perhaps you previously imported at a lower rate, then you can claim back the higher rate against those higher rate goods. That could be a viable strategy here for the reciprocal tariffs. What's interesting is that when he placed the 20% fentanyl tariff on China, he specifically prohibited the use of drawback to refund that 20% duties, but he didn't do so in this latest round of reciprocal tariffs. So for Chinese goods, theoretically, you could get back the 34%, but not the 20%. And the drawback is the other duties, whether it be 301 duties or normal duties, remain eligible for drawback in all cases. We don't know if his silence in the executive order was about not prohibiting drawback was intentional or not. So things could possibly change, but as it's written today, it's a viable option. And that really concludes my presentation. That's me. I guess we can open it up for questions. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, Peter, I have a lot of questions and I've tried to put them in some order. So hopefully I'm going to answer a few people's questions at one time. All right, first questions that came up had to do with, you had mentioned about goods on the water being exempted at a certain point. And there was a number of questions about what that meant, and also what, if they were air freighting it, what that, what that meant. And if it's on the water, does that mean it's laden or has departed from the port?
The language of the executive order requires that essentially the vessel be in motion. So just being loaded on a vessel at the port of export is not sufficient. And again, the executive order uses the language of vessel. Doesn't say airplane, doesn't say rail, doesn't say truck. We don't know if that's intentional or not. So that's an open question that needs to be clarified. I mean, at this point, it doesn't hurt to try to get it in on any mode of transportation you can, and then trying to fight for the exemption. You might qualify. But right now, the language is vessel. And again, as I indicated in the example of Vancouver, could that be a technical violation of the exemption if the boat comes to Vancouver and then it gets railed down? The straight language executive order would indicate that. Just figured out how to stop sharing. The current language of the executive order limits it to vessel as the last mode of transport.
Gotcha. Keep putting the questions in the Q&A. For whatever reason, the chat is not working, but I am getting the Q&A. Okay, there was a few questions, Peter, about finished product versus components and also product samples.
Well, finished product versus components makes no difference. I mean, these reciprocal tariffs are across the board on all products unless they're specifically exempted. So that makes no difference. It's all based on the tariff classification of the imported item. Samples, there is Chapter 98 provisions of the tariff, which are special duty provisions that cover a lot of different things, including samples, would be exempt from these duties if it qualifies for that tariff provision, 9811, if I recall. So sometimes it requires they be mutilated or permanently stamped so they can't be resold. And those would qualify as samples that would be exempt from this reciprocal tariff.
Great. Okay. There was a few questions about leather bags coming from the EU. What would that
Well,
be?
the EU is, the reciprocal tariff is 20% effective April 9th. And that's going to be on top of the regular duty rate. So, you know, those companies that are importing leather bags from the EU should be looking at strategies to reduce the value, um, to try to mitigate the impact, which we've done quite a bit of work with in Europe, in fact.
I hope I'm going to ask this question properly, but it popped up a few times and it had to do with Venezuela and Cuba. That the rates there seem to be lower than other places. And then there was a question about the 25% tariff on the Venezuelan oil and gas.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the rate of, I haven't memorized all the, Venezuela is 15%. And what was the other one? Cuba, you said, right?
Yeah.
Cuba, well, all right, they're different. They're treated differently. So let's start with Cuba. Cuba is not a most favored nation country, and therefore was excluded from this action because it already has a penalty tariff, and most tariffs from Cuba are around 45%. So, there are very few countries that don't have most favored nation status. Even Russia does, and get baseline normal rates, but Cuba does not. So that's why Cuba was accepted. Venezuela, yeah, that's kind of a mystery. I guess why it's 15%. I mean, these rates, there's a lot of funny math that went into calculating these rates. They really have nothing to do, even though the messaging was that these are to offset the duty rates that those countries have going into their countries. The way they were calculated had little to nothing to do with that. Apparently, they calculated some sort of formula that compared trade deficits with export volume, and they came up with these percentages. So that may have been what resulted in a Venezuela 15%. In terms of the Venezuelan oil, President Trump did announce that he was going to impose 25% additional tariff, separate and apart from everything we've talked about, on any country that purchases oil from Venezuela. China being, by the way, the #1 customer of oil from Venezuela. So they could theoretically get another 25%. He's left it to the Department of Commerce to identify those countries. So nothing has happened yet. Those tariffs have not been implemented as of yet, but there's certainly a lingering threat that they will come.
Okay. There was a few questions about the bonded warehouse and if you could take your own, like a portion of your own warehouse and turn it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are essentially two types of bonded warehouse. There's a private bonded warehouse, which could be your own warehouse that you can apply to customs to have a bonded area, either the whole warehouse or just part of it. Their customs has to approve the facility. The bonded stuff has to be kept separate from the non-bonded customs cleared or domestic goods. There has to be security within the warehouse to avoid people just walking into the bonded area, things of that nature. So there's a whole procedure, but it's not that bad. Or there are public bonded warehouses, that you can just sign up with, if you will, and they'll allocate space for you. So either way, that's doable. And you can probably get a bonded warehouse set up, in 3 months, maybe 3 to 6 months. It really depends on code in processing the approvals.
Okay. A couple questions about the drawbacks and just kind of demystifying that, explaining how it works.
Yeah, drawbacks are a little confusing. So there are various types of drawback. The simplest one being if you import something and pay duty and then export it within 5 years of the date of import, you can get 99% of the duties back. So that's pretty simple, right? If you import this, there we go. If you import this pen and export this pen, and these pens are commercially interchangeable. They don't have to be identical. These happen to be identical. Then you can claim back the duty on either importation. Okay, so if you import this pen 3 years ago and paid the normal duty rate, and then today you import this pen and pay the additional 34% from China, theoretically, if you export this pen, even though this pen you paid the normal rate, you can duty on this pen. That's called substitution drawback, substitution unused drawback. It's a complicated concept, but it's potentially workable. So for a company that's sitting on inventory that was previously imported of like merchandise, there may be a play to export that and offset the tariffs that you're now paying new like merchandise upon importation.
Got it. Okay, there was a couple questions that it seemed like they're in the same theme, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but there's a lot of
That's
questions.
okay.
I'm trying to keep up with them. Uh, so you mentioned the sunglass option about if the lens, its country of origin is where the lens is put in. So if I made my frame elsewhere and worked with a lens company here, it would be a US made product. And there was a similar product about pillows. If I stuff it here, does the pillow, what's the country of origin for the pillow?
I mean, yeah, each product has its kind of own rules. So the way country of origin works is the standard that customs applies is called substantial transformation. And it's kind of a subjective standard, but it's whether a new and different article of commerce is created through a significant manufacturing process. Okay. So for example, in the case of the ring casted in one country and polished and set in the other, customs says, well, the ring is the major the casting is the major manufacturing operation, and it kind of dedicates that casting is dedicated to be that final product. So that's why they determine that the casting dictates the origin. For whatever reason, with sunglasses, customs has ruled that it's not the frame that dedicate. And I would think the frame is more like a casting, frankly. But customs has gone the other way. They've said, well, the manufacturing of the lens and the insertion of the lens into the frame is more significant than the manufacture of the frames themselves. So, and pillows have their own rules, and there are certain categories that have special rules, like textile articles, for example. Any textile article has a separate set of country of origin rules, which incorporate tariff shift. And the same with UMCA, they have their own origin rules, again, based on a shift of tariff analysis. And you'd have to look at both the finished item tariff classification and all the components that are being used in the manufacture to determine whether you meet those tariff shift requirements. So, I can't give a one fits all response.
Some simple questions, but is there a place where somebody could go to see what every country is currently tariffed, and where would we go and look for that?
Just talking about the reciprocal tariffs or all tariffs?
Yeah, I would say all
the
reciprocal.
reason I asked that question is because the reciprocal tariffs that were issued this week, that's simple. Just Google Annex 1 of the executive order on reciprocal tariffs and you'll find it. It's a whole long schedule. But to find where, all the tariffs, let's say for China, because as you can tell, they're kind of stacking up, that's a little more complicated. There is no great one, public source for that. I mean, your customs broker could probably tell you in most cases, but those are harder to find. I mean, I imagine those services exist or will be popping up very soon.
There was a couple of questions about artwork or consignment pieces that might be used for exhibits.
If you, sorry, my phone's ringing off. If you, well, again, it's a question of Chapter 98, whether you can fit into a Chapter 98 provision. So something that's exported for exhibit and brought back, that's no problem. That falls into a Chapter 98 tariff provision. Straight works of art that are not of U.S. origin are subject to the reciprocal tariffs. So if you have a modern painting from France, it's going to be subject to the 20%, even though works of art generally or traditionally are unconditionally duty-free. They have, they were never subject to duty. Now they're not exempted from these reciprocal tariffs. So it depends on the item and depends on the purpose of the import. If you import something for exhibition, there are temporary importation procedures which would be exempt from this tariff.
Probably a good closing question, but I'm going to try to get to a few more. There's a lot of very specific questions here. Is there anything at this point we can do, Peter? Last time there was an exclusion process. We prepared forms. We testified in front of a congressional committee. I haven't seen any of that yet. So what action might we take?
Yeah, they don't exist as of yet anyway. So you're right. When the 301 tariffs came out, there was an exemption process, and the criteria for those exemptions were to demonstrate that you couldn't source the product in the U.S. You tried but couldn't source the product outside of China. Remember, it was a China-specific program, and so forth. So, and as long as it didn't get any domestic opposition, you got an exemption. That lasted for a while. But then they closed that procedure, and whatever exemptions were issued were extended. And over the course of time, the list was narrowed significantly. And now there still remains a handful of exemptions due to expire May 31st. The general thinking is that it's not going to be further extended, whatever exemptions exist. And there's been absolutely no talk about reopening an exemption process, whether it be for the original 301 tax or for any of these new
You just, some reason we lost your voice.
Really?
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, there's no indication that there'll be an exemption process. As further evidence of that, the steel and aluminum tariffs, which are not directly relevant to this group, used to also have an exclusion procedure, which President Trump terminated. So doesn't seem to be open to giving exceptions.
Well, there was one question about steel and aluminum. I have to go back and find it, but I think it had to do with like cooked baking sheets. Like, is it steel and aluminum or is it a product?
No, well, okay.
Not an accessory question, but I'll slide it in.
That's okay. The steel and aluminum tariffs. So back in the first Trump administration, he imposed 25% tariffs on straight steel and aluminum products, classifiable in Chapter 73 and 76 of the tariff. 73 is steel, 76 is aluminum. More recently, he broadened those 25% tariffs to also cover derivative products. Derivative products are finished products that contain steel and aluminum. And in that case, if the steel and aluminum was...
Oh, lost you again, Peter. I don't know what.
How about now?
Yep, there you are.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry, I'll get close to the mic maybe. So anyway, so if the steel or aluminum did not come from the United States, then for those derivative products on the list, one needs the 25% on the steel or aluminum content of the item. So, but the list is specific, and it has specific tariff numbers, and there are two separate lists, one for steel and one for aluminum. So for example, exercise equipment is on, I forget whether it's on the steel list or the aluminum list, but it's on a, so one has to check those lists very carefully. I don't know offhand. I know there's some cookware on the derivative list. I don't know whether it covers baking sheets offhand. We could look at it.
Okay, couple questions about the exemption for printed material. And what does that mean exactly?
Well, in the annex number 2, there it's a long list of tariff numbers, most of which covers metal products and chemicals and pharmaceuticals and things like that. Let's see if I have it here. I don't have it here. There are tariff numbers that include printed books and materials. So one has to see whether your imported books and materials are on that Annex 2 list by tariff classification. If they are, they're not subject to this reciprocal tariff, but they may very well be subject down the road when they get around to the wood and paper tariffs, which are pending a 232 investigation.
Interesting question. Regarding a transaction value on licensed product, can they separate the royalty element out of the price of the goods when paying tariff?
That's a very good question.
I thought it was
Generally
a good
speaking,
question.
it's a very good question. The answer is maybe. Generally speaking, royalties for trademark and the right to sell are not considered dutiable if they're paid to a party who's not related to the seller of the goods. So it's paid to a licensor. You're importing a Disney product and you're paying Disney a royalty. That's not subject to duty. It can be excluded because you're not buying the goods from Disney. You're buying it from a manufacturer overseas. The exception is patent royalties. Patent royalties are subject to duty. So if there is a patent royalty, one would want to see if one can bifurcate that royalty into partially patent, partially trademark, if the facts support it. If the royalties being paid to a party related to the seller of the merchandise, we believe that's also not dutiable, and we litigated a case and won on those very facts involving an Armani royalty several years ago, but Customs has been kind of mixed in how they've been applying the ruling of that decision. So that's something that should be looked at more carefully if that fits your facts.
Another interesting question. Says, my factory also designs our products, does engineering and provides consulting services. Could we renegotiate our product cost and have two separate invoices, one for service and one for product cost?
Certain services are not dutiable, certain services are. So design that's necessary for the production of the finished product is subject to duty. So that's if it's foreign design. If it's US design, it's not. So if they're doing design, then that is subject to duty, but other services, surveying the marketplace for new manufacturers, branding, quality control, things like that, which are not necessary for production, can be separated out. They should be paid to a separate entity. It's much cleaner, but if they're verifiable services, they can be structured to be non-dutiable. But it's not just a matter of creating two invoices. Word to the wise.
Gotcha. Peter, I know we spoke about it yesterday or when we had our Fashion Service Network meeting, but the goods that are coming in under $800, we'll call it the Sheins, the Timos. Where are we with that? So yes.
Well, I covered it. I mean, the under $800 is being eliminated for China goods effective May 2nd. And for all other goods, it is the intention of the government to eliminate it for all countries once they get their systems in place to do so. Obviously, it's a sea change because uh, it's such a huge volume of goods coming in.
Okay. There's a couple questions about items that have mixed materials, like a belt with a metal buckle. Um, there was another belt question earlier about, I guess that tariff would vary depending on and where it was made. There was a couple
Where it
questions.
was made and what the essential character of the belt is, for example. Is it classified as a leather belt based on the strap, or is it classified on the based on the buckle? I mean, I didn't talk about tariff classification as a potential strategy because it's not effective with respect to the reciprocal tariffs, because the reciprocal tariffs are on all products, right? But to the extent that the other tariffs, that are applicable to the import, whether it be the 301 or normal tariff, that the classification is always a strategy one can look at to reduce those.
I know we touched on it earlier, but I'm seeing a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask again about an item, the jewelry item, where it's cast versus where it's finished, and how does that work? So expensive, a casting, expensive stone comes in somewhere else.
Well, again, it's customs rule. It doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense, but customs has stuck to it. Where you cast is the country of origin, the finished item. It doesn't matter that how much value you add in the second country where you're setting with stones from even a third country, polishing, et cetera, et cetera. It's still the country of the casting. So you still have to pay duty on the full value of the imported item when it comes in, generally speaking, unless it's a U.S. casting, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that's simply the rule. So if it's a U.S. casting and you send it, let's say, to China, and you do all this work in China, and you bring back the product, it can potentially qualify for two different tariff provisions. One, the normal jewelry tariff provision, but it's a product of the United States, so it's only subject to the normal 5.5% tariff in that case, not subject to any of the China tariffs. Or you can claim a Chapter 98 provision that covers foreign assembly, essentially, that doesn't rise to the level of a manufacturer, and you can pay duty on the cost of the foreign processing. In this particular case, you're better off paying the 5.5% on the finished item on the full value than you are paying the 67% in the example I had up earlier on the cost of the Chinese processing, in all likelihood. But you have the option of doing either. But in both cases, it's considered a product of the United States and would be treated that way.
Okay. There was a question earlier about when you're paying the tariff, is it on the product plus the duty, or is the duty separate?
I'm not sure I understand the question. The duty, all these duty rates are applied based on the value of the imported goods, the value normally being the invoice from the foreign seller. So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. Let me just see. We still have a lot here. Okay. Well, as we're moving towards the end, and there's a lot of very specific questions that are niche to their individual product category. So I'm going to encourage everyone to become a student of your individual product categories. And that's the kind of thing that Peter can do in a one-on-one review, is to look at all of the steps and the unique nature of your product and try to figure out what solutions might be best to save you the most money. But, certainly letting your customs broker check the box for you is probably not going to be the best bet. And I think the biggest question, Peter, is what do we think is going to happen? And what do we think the overall impact is going to be here?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. No one does, especially with the current administration. But that said, my personal opinion is that there's going to be a lot of negotiation and movement in these tariffs. Um, you already, read about that all the time. Israel dropped all their tariffs on US products in an effort to try to, avoid this situation. They did it a little too late. They did it on April 2nd. He had his rose garden ceremony on April 2nd. But I would expect, for example, that Israel's going to work out a deal so their rate either disappears or gets substantially lowered. I'll tell you what Israel's rate is for the heck of it. They're at 17% right now. So it's likely to go down. I think China will come up with some negotiated resolution. Will it all go away? I sincerely doubt it. But I think it'll be reduced possibly by 20%. But that's just a guess on my part. I think Europe also, the problem is that, the knee-jerk reaction for all these foreign governments is to retaliate. So like China put a 34% tariff yesterday on all US products to retaliate against our 34%. So, and that raises the temperature, and then, people have to come to a table and lower it. So, but I think things will shift around, and you have to, be on top of it. That's all I can say. I do think, though, that, again, personal opinion is that the baseline 10% is here to stay. I think that the administration really likes the idea of that subsidy for the Treasury.
Well, and I will remind everyone that the last administration didn't remove any tariffs. Those tariffs, the Trump original tariffs, stayed in place. The Biden administration did not wipe them out. So we have been dealing and living with them, for years now. So who knows? Nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know. Peter, there are so many questions here, and I apologize. We're never going to get through all of them. But what I can promise you is that the Accessories Council, our team, will be on top of this as much as we possibly can. If you have specific questions, of course, our expertise and our attention is going to be on the categories that we cover. Any hats, gloves, scarves, belts, jewelry, shoes, optical. So, we're going to know more about those than others, but general questions, follow our newsletter. We'll put that information in there. And, continue to follow up with Peter directly. You can reach out to me, Karen at accessoriescouncil.org. Sign up for our website, accessoriescouncil.com. Happy to give as much information as we have. If you reach out to me, I will also send you the recording so you can share with your teams. And, I go back to now's the time trade associations need support the most. So if you're not a member, find out about being a member, because we want to keep being able to support you, and we need your support to make that happen. Peter, I can't imagine the day that you have ahead, but I thank you so much for your time and of your friendship, and I am sure I will be in touch soon.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for signing in, and good luck to all.
I will remain on for a few minutes if anyone has any accessory council questions. And Peter, again, thank you so much.
I'll say good afternoon to everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
My email again is Karen, Karen, at accessoriescouncil.org. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want a copy of the recording, reach out. I'll shoot it out probably later this afternoon. Follow our newsletter and our website. We're going to keep you as posted as we can. And just know that we feel your pain and are here to help. And as much as we can do, we will do that. Have a good afternoon and a great weekend. Take care.